Thank you for having me here. I'm going to give a history of RFG in Kentucky and its impacts. So first, start out with DAQ's mission statement. We are here to protect human health and the environment by achieving and maintaining acceptable air quality. All right. So federal EPA set national ambient air quality standards for 6 criteria of pollutants. Today we're going to talk about ozone. Ozone is formed with NOx and VOC and sunlight. Chemical reaction creates ozone, so it's not a source that's emitting ozone, but sources that are emitting VOC and NOx, and it has a chemical reaction that produces ozone. And it's, so I guess 2 things. Ozone, there's the ozone layer that's up in the sky in the stratosphere, and that's a good thing. That protects the planet from UV radiation. Ozone on the ground level, us breathing in, that's not a good thing. So in 1990 Clear Air Act amendments, EPA had requirements for areas that had serious non-attainment that they had to adopt RFG. So Louisville and Northern Kentucky were not, they were declared moderate, so not severe, not one of the worst non-attainment for ozone. So they were not required to be into that program. But to take advantage of the reduction of VOC and NOx, at that time, Governor Jones opted in to the RFG program. That's the reformulated gasoline. So Louisville and Northern Kentucky both had those programs from 1995. Northern Kentucky removed the RFG requirement, started the process in 2017. It's for Northern Kentucky, the process was a lot easier. They are attaining the national ambient air quality standards for ozone. The current standard is 2015 ozone standard. It's 70 parts per billion. It still wasn't, an easy process. We had the multiple steps that we had to go through to remove the RFG in Northern Kentucky. The RFG areas currently include all of Jefferson County, portions of Bullitt going down to Shepherdsville on the map here, and up to LaGrange and Oldham County. And then a little bit more detailed map here so we can look at Oldham County. You can see Buckner and LaGrange, Crestwood, Pee Wee Valley, and then Bullitt County. My grandmother-in-law was from the Hillview area, so Hillview down to Shepherdsville. And then the annual cost comparison, and this is throughout the whole year. You can see Clarksville, Indiana, across the river from Louisville, the highest prices there. Cincinnati, the blue line, the next highest, and then Louisville in the middle with Bowling Green and Lexington and Covington below it. And then the ozone season cost comparison for Covington, Cincinnati, and then the surrounding area of Louisville. It was only a requirement for to burn ozone during the ozone season. So ozone forms, like I said, in the presence of sunlight. So this summer so far, where it's really been hot, a lot of heat, it makes ozone form more rapidly. So with that in mind, we have an ozone season where you have to take more precautions to reduce ozone formation. And so you can see the price comparison just during the ozone season, so April to September here. and the cost differential in the corner here. All right. Since Kentucky's opted in, there have been gasoline has gotten better over time, just from federal policies, the Energy Policy Act 2015, the EPA Tier 2 gasoline sulfur standards, CAFE standards, gasoline and vehicle emissions have gotten less over time. So really the question that I'm sure you get quite a bit is, can RFG be removed? And it's a multi-step process. For our Northern Kentucky area, it took 15 months to do that, and they were in attainment of the ozone standards at the time. So put this out here just on its individual slide. It's more difficult to remove if you're in a non-attainment area, and the hard part is you have to have reductions from other sources. So you can't just get rid of it. You have to find other sources that you're going to reduce NOx and VOC emissions from. And I know that was a little quick, but I'm happy to answer any questions, or Rachel can go ahead with the rest of hers first. But, yep, I will be happy to.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to follow up with Michael's presentation and talk a little bit about the Clean Air Act and the redesignation process and how ozone and its impact is being dealt with in Louisville. Next slide. So we all use a general kind of graphic where we show that nitrogen oxides plus volatile organic compounds in the presence of sunlight during our ozone season, which for Louisville runs from March until the end of October, forms ozone. It's not a directly emitted pollutant, but as Michael said, it comes from this mixture.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could she have the microphone closer to your mouth, because I can barely hear you.
Thank you very much. Better? Okay. So when we have NOx, those nitrogen oxides, that comes from combustion of fuel, whether it's fuel from a vehicle or fuel from an electric generating utility or other emission source. And volatile organic compounds range from both industrial sources all the way up to the hairspray I used this morning before I came here. This bowl of spaghetti that you see there is actually the equation for ozone formation. And it is that complex. It is driven not just by those sources, but also very much by the weather. And I know everyone hates it when it's both hot and muggy, but it actually scrubs ozone out of the atmosphere. So if there's any reason to be happy about a muggy day, that's it. Next slide, please. The Clean Air Act, at its core, is a public health strategy. Ozone has public health consequences, and that includes increased asthma. It essentially will give you what some people describe as a sunburn to your lungs. There are also environmental impacts from high ozone. Next slide, please. As you'll see, the Clean Air Act is a continuous improvement program. As Michael mentioned, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards are set, and then Congress requires US EPA to come back and review the most recent health-based science. And when that science says that there are still public health impacts, they require a lower standard, and then leave it to state and local air pollution control agencies to develop the plan to reach that next level. And you can see from our graph, as that standard has changed over time, it's been a challenge for Louisville. Next slide. One more. So the Clean Air Act, again, tells us what we need to do. In 2018, Louisville and Northern Kentucky also were designated as marginal non-attainment. That's the lowest level of ozone non-attainment. The steps that you see on the slide here are steps that we've already taken, with the exception of that last that says attainment deadline. For marginal non-attainment areas, we were to have demonstrated compliance with that new standard of 70 parts per billion using a 3-year design set from 2018 to 2020. Neither Louisville nor Northern Kentucky were able to make that demonstration, although both areas, I'm very happy to say, are currently meeting that standard. Next slide. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us in two places. One, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail on the next slide, is that Louisville and Northern Kentucky, through the cabinet, have prepared our requests for redesignation. So put a pin in that for just a moment. But at the same time, the Clean Air Act tells US EPA that we missed that deadline in August of 2021 with that 2018 to 2020 design step, and it requires them to propose bumping our area up to moderate non-attainment. Now that opens up some additional tools in the toolbox. It allows for more stringent controls on emission sources, such as electric generating utilities or industrial sources of those nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds. But it also, that's what you'll see there when it says racked rackham. If you haven't observed, we're creatures of acronyms around here, but that racked rackham is reasonably achievable control technology and reasonably achievable control measures. We have a plan once EPA finalizes our bump up or reclassifies us to moderate, that'll be due to them in January of 2023. And then if we continue to be in moderate non-attainment, then by 2026, there is a requirement for those areas bumped up to moderate to actually implement a vehicle emissions testing or an inspections and maintenance program. Next slide. So that's kind of the uncomfortable news. The better news is this. If we are redesignated to attainment, then our planning and other requirements for moderate non-attainment cease. They stop. Currently, the Cabinet for Northern Kentucky and Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control District for Louisville, Jefferson County, parts of Bullitt and Oldham, as well as two areas across in Indiana, Clark and Floyd County, which is why that comparison to the gas prices in Clarksville is important, because they too have a gasoline requirement to lower ozone. We've each publicly noticed our requests for redesignation. The Cabinet's public comment period ends on July 27th. Our public comment period ends on the 29th. And after that, that proposal goes to US EPA. Once it's approved, then we are designated as attainment. That's a good place for us to be. And with that, I think that's my last slide.
Okay, we do have some questions. Senator Yates.
First of all, thank you both for being here. This is a very common discussion for my district representing Jefferson County. My father used to work in Rubbertown, and I was listening to slides, and I was talking to my colleague a little bit some of the history about how some of this was implemented, and the RFG came in place before the STARS program and whatnot, and how that since then there's been some major changes there, especially with the LG&E and everything else going into it. So I'll see how that may affect it. My question to you would be, of automobiles, the RFG, the automobiles, what percentage, to the best we understand, does that correlate to the ozone damage that we have in Jefferson County? And then looking into it, if we're looking at potentially a 15% increase in electric vehicles in the next 2 years, how that may positively impact. At the same time, comparing it to will there be any additional particles because of the electric grids that are being proposed. So I know all those kind of come into play because you just gave me a graph of what we're planning on, but the presentation before shows that we got some major changes happening in that area. So I just want to make sure that's all complemented to kind of look together as we plan for the future to move ourselves away.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. So from an emissions inventory standpoint, from point sources like those Rubbertown facilities or electric generating utilities, the point source to mobile source NOx emissions, it's about 1/3. When we look at volatile organic compounds from those point sources to mobile sources, it's about a half, but we have a tremendously high amount of non-point source volatile organic compounds in Louisville. What we've done here at APCD to better understand ozone formation, again, it's that spaghetti dish equation, which is really tricky, We did an ozone formation study a number of years ago to really dial in to see what our driver of ozone formation is. And for the most part, our area is sensitive to NOx. So controlling those nitrogen oxide emissions is really important for us. With respect to LG&E, for the third year now, we have an agreed board order with them on a voluntary basis, but it's still enforceable, that they will optimize the use of their controls at Mill Creek and also Cane Run, which switched to natural gas, in order to limit the amount of nitrogen oxides formed. So that's very helpful. We can kind of model that and see if that will help us reduce the amount of the potential for ozone formation within Jefferson County. But air pollution doesn't really abide by jurisdictional boundaries. And so we also know that we get about 30% of the nitrogen oxides coming into Jefferson County from outside of our area. So this is a very challenging control strategy that we implement in conjunction with the cabinet for the rest of the state and also with our partners at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, or IDEM. Thank you.
Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's certainly good news to hear that you're working on a request for reclassification. Thank you for that good news today. I guess a question that I've heard the last several days and wanted to ask is the West Virginia versus the EPA. Would that have any effect on RFG, or is that mixing apples and oranges?
Well, I'll try my best on that one. I confess that I've been able to read the opinion once or twice and see some coverage of it. The amount of reductions that were expected under the initial Clean Power Plan, which was passed by the Obama administration, and then rescinded under the Affordable Clean Energy rule, we've achieved those reductions already. So we know that we've hit that milestone, I think, about 9 years early, and that's a very good thing for us. I think that on a going forward basis, how that actually implements the work is yet to be seen.
One other thing you mentioned, and probably one of the most unpopular things ever in Jefferson County, you mentioned the vehicle emission testing. I think that was probably a very happy day for many, many, many people when that was eliminated in Jefferson County. So hopefully that discussion doesn't come back up again. But like I said, it was very unpopular.
We do a whole lot with our planning in terms of trying to manage ozone formation in order to avoid that designation. We think we have a good plan. This summer, the weather is something we can't control, and it has been a challenging summer already. So we have our fingers crossed that not only do we have an approvable request for redesignation once it gets to US EPA, but also that our weather breaks and we continue to have some milder, wetter, cooler days and less ozone formation overall. We've had several exceedances, but we've not yet exceeded the standard.
Well, I did represent part of Jefferson County some time back, and I think that those constituents I did represent would say no vehicle emission testing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Bratcher.
Thank you. This is not a remark against any one of you two. I think this RFG thing has been the biggest scam that this state has ever seen. Now, you go in with the governor in what year was it, 1990? And you can't get out of it. And here we are 35 years later, and the people have spoken. We've spent, how many resolutions have we done to get us off of this thing? Northern Kentucky got off, and that's great. And Louisville, now you say Louisville's about to get off, and hopefully we will. But I just am real disappointed in the government as a whole, is the way this thing is set up. And I didn't catch your answer to the Supreme Court change. Is that going to affect this program? And I have other questions, and I'll be quick, Mr. Chairman.
I don't believe it will in terms of what the Supreme Court answered was a very narrow question as to whether or not US EPA could regulate the greenhouse gas emissions from existing electric generating utilities under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. So it was a very narrow question. It's one that is kind of moot, candidly.
Okay. Cane Run had had coal power facilities at one time, and now it doesn't, right? Now, how could a whole smokestack operation come down, but we're still on this RFG? 'Cause how many smokestacks or coal-powered plants are there in this district that somebody created here?
So within Jefferson County, we had two coal-fired electric generating utilities. We had Cane Run, and we also have Mill Creek, which is currently still a coal-burning facility. They were required to make changes to their facility to comply with other parts of the federal Clean Air Act, in particular the mercury air toxics rule and also the sulfur dioxide National Ambient Air Quality Standard that changed in 2010. When Michael mentioned that we can get rid of RFG if we can replace those emissions with something else, those emissions that we can use to replace RFG have to be quantifiable, enforceable, permanent, and surplus, which means if they're used to satisfy another part of the Clean Air Act, we can't double count them and they wouldn't count for getting rid of RFG.
Well, I'm talking about how can you take down an entire coal-fired power plant but still be on this? Did that not reduce the NOx and the VOx and all that?
It certainly has reduced the nitrogen oxides. And
What year was that closed, do you know?
So Cane Run converted to natural gas at the end of 2015, and then Mill Creek also did about another $1 billion worth of additional work on Mill Creek in order to meet the mercury air toxics rule and the SO2 rule. That was mid-2016.
Did we go down in attainment numbers during the COVID years, the 2 years? I mean, there were times where nobody was on the road.
We did see both I'll separate those out. From a mobile source standpoint, we did see a reduction in mobile source emissions in the very early part of 2020. But that actually rebounded by summer with the exception of some early morning transit. And then it was back up to normal levels right quickly. With respect to electric generation, one thing to keep in mind is on this graph, you'll see there that in 2013 to 2015, we went from green to orange. That represents the change in the National Ambient Air Quality Standard.
Now, who changes that?
US
Congress?
EPA.
Unelected U.S. EPA changes it?
So the Clean Air Act requires, best way to think about the Clean Air Act is that it is a continuous improvement plan. And under it, Congress charged EPA for these 6 criteria pollutants with setting that National Ambient Air Quality Standard. And then every 5 years, Congress charged that same EPA with going back and reviewing the science to
And they
determine.
keep going lower. The standards keep going lower. So once you get into this finger mouse trap, you can never get out, right?
Well, at this point, we have a standard that went from 72 parts per billion in 2015 to 70 parts per billion. US EPA has kind of come out with their initial review of that 2015 standard to say, at this point, we're going to keep it at 70 parts per billion. And so it fluctuates, it changes, but it is based on public health. And so that is what they're aiming for, is to go ahead and continue to improve public health.
I'm almost done, Mr. Chairman. This is for you, Mr. Kennedy.
I'm actually enjoying it.
Thank you, guys. Mr. Kennedy, is RFG cost more than regular gas? You had some graphs up there.
So yeah, RFG does cost more than conventional gasoline.
Do you know how much? Somebody said 32 cents average.
Well, I think in when you're looking at a refinery where they're producing it, I know it's not that much. It's more in the 6 cents range. Now, what you're getting at a retail gasoline station when you fill up, there's so many factors that go into that. I can't tell you what.
So,
what the
but it
difference
does
is there.
cost more.
It
So
does
the
cost
people in my district and Tom's and Representative Miller and Yates, they're paying more than other places in Kentucky to achieve these attainments. Yes, ma'am.
There is a difference, and Michael's right. Based on conversations with US EPA's Office of Transportation and Air Quality, it's about a 6-cent difference, 5 to 7 cents. But over the summer and, in various times of the year, we track gasoline prices to see what's going on in the marketplace. And right now, candidly, gasoline is less expensive in Louisville than in Covington, where they use conventional gas, and it has been since the start of ozone season this year. So I'm not sure what that's about, other than we can't really tell what the marketplace demand is when we look at the gas prices at the retail level.
The last question is Miss Hamilton, right? Mm-hmm. Dr. Hamilton?
No, I'm afraid not.
You're a scientist, and I appreciate your answers today. But here's my question, and this is no reflection on you. What can I do? What can the state of Kentucky do, Jefferson County, Louisville, what can we do to eliminate your job? The Air Pollution Control Board. How in the world can you get rid of the Air Pollution Control Board, and who does it work for? I know you ask it if it's a federal board, a state board, a quasi board, a local board. Who runs that thing,
So-
and how can we, in 3 steps or less, get rid of it?
We are a creature of Kentucky statute. We were
Well, that's
enacted
what I thought.
under KRS Chapter 77 in 1952, although the district has been improving air quality since the mid-40s. Is something they started out as a smoke commission. So in terms of how the Clean Air Act works, it is unique among the environmental media, air, water, or waste, in that it specifically calls out and gives equal footing to local programs to develop the plans in order to reduce air pollution to meet those national ambient air quality standards.
And I have a bill to dismantle that, so I did know the answer, but I have heard that there is serious ramifications if we passed a bill like that.
The district has in some respects, what the district manages in terms of the number of sources and the complexity of our airshed is really very similar to the amount of sources that the state of Wyoming regulates. It's a very small geographic area that is a manufacturing driver in terms of the sources that are there. I sometimes get asked by our economic development people why our air quality is different than Nashville. And if you can find me another jurisdiction that has 2 automotive assembly plants, had 2 coal-fired electric generating utilities, now just has 1 really large one, plus a natural gas-fired electric generating utility, Rubbertown, and the state's largest wastewater treatment plant, then I'm hoping there's another similar jurisdiction out there. But it is a unique environment to work in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is our next question. I've just enjoyed the conversation. I'd like to have you all at dinner some evening and listen to all this discussion. Representative Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and
See if
all
you can
the
top that.
Oh, yeah, all the entertaining questions and answers. And these, I'm going to ask 2 questions real quick, and I'll let you guys answer, and it, in whatever order. But I have a curiosity: is how much of the country, if you're aware, is using RFG or required to use RFG gas in population, not in area or anything. There are districts that are required to do it in population, roughly. And then the second question is somewhat related to jurisdiction and things we've been talking about. Any of the science around ozone protected or ozone designated areas, and whether or not it moves or affects, for instance, something outside of the area that's targeted into suburban areas, and I'm talking about certain more crowded population areas like mine in northern Kentucky, and even into rural areas. And there's a follow-up with that question is, what are some of the numbers that we might see in some of the most rural parts of Kentucky as far as 70 parts per million as opposed to what we see in some of the urban parts? Sorry for those three.
I'll jump in there and say that the state of California and much of the Southwest are required to use reformulated gas. So from a population basis, there's a large number of the population is covered by having to use reformulated gas. So with respect to ozone designation and how a non-attainment area may impact an area nearby, when there is a new standard, that National Ambient Air Quality Standard, or NAAQS, is passed, we go through about an 18-month process to properly define the area. And that starts out with the state actually proposes, based on our understanding of the population, the sources of pollution that are there, in fact, the type of pollution. Ozone is rather unique, again, because it's not directly emitted from a stationary source, but it comes from that combined nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds. And actually, in some areas of the country, those volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, are actually a lot of biogenic. So places, for example, where they have a lot of pine trees, that terpene is a volatile organic compound that can really impact ozone formation. So we start with the state looking at those sources of pollution, the type of pollution, the population, and then making a recommendation to US EPA. It's not as easy as we think it should be here. There's a whole lot of work that goes into modeling and being sure that we are finding the area that is most impacted to protect public health. EPA then comes back with either an agreement or they go through their own process where they might reject a finding based on their analysis of those same factors. And they come out with a technical support document, and you can actually see where they take into account, say for Louisville, the traffic that we get from residents in Indiana who come to work in Louisville, Oldham County, and what that impact, even though there are not that many industrial sources there, what that may mean within our area. We also understand that for Clark and Floyd County and our portions of Oldham and Bullock counties that are part of our metropolitan statistical area and our ozone non-attainment area, that we have sources in Louisville that are differently managed, those stationary sources.
Yeah, my last question was, do we know what some of the readings that we are getting in rural areas is? For instance, the standard had dropped from 0.8 to 0.72 to 0.7 now.
As far as the specific readings so far this ozone season, what I do know and what we really track is how many are over the 70 parts per billion standard, and it's rare for us to have an exceedance of that standard in a rural area. Does that answer your question?
We even see in Louisville, though, sometimes during the summer season, ozone levels as low as 53 parts per billion. And I think that would probably be quite comparable to what you would find in a rural area. A lot of it comes back to weather, and in Louisville's case, geography. We actually have, mountains kind of around us. You don't really see them, but we are in a valley, and that traps air. And when we have hot, dry, stagnant air masses that kind of come and sit over the city, that's really problematic for us. So you get out into other rural areas, a little wider open, you lose kind of that geographic bowl. You can see some pretty low ozone.
I know during the winter, in our lab, which would be just ambient air, we were seeing 35 parts per billion.
Okay, last question is Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hamilton, I appreciate getting some clarification on Senator Higdon's question on the West Virginia situation. My understanding, there's three pillars in that in the Clean Air Act, and one of which deals with the reformulated gas, and the other one deals with happening to West Virginia about fixed facilities and so forth. But one particular aspect of that decision, when I was talking to the LRC staff, was very, very knowledgeable, and I appreciate their insight, dealt with economic impact, economic studies, and so forth. So how do you justify, or how do you look at, or what's your thoughts on the economic justification for reformulated gas in Louisville in relation to that court case?
So there are two different provisions of the Clean Air Act that we're talking about. We are looking in that Supreme Court case at the US EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases. Where there is explicit direction to EPA, the rules are a little bit different. And so in this case, while RFG is not as cost effective as it was when it first came out, because gasoline as a product has become more refined. We're on Tier 3 gasoline now, and that's taken up some of the advantage. Our primary goal at the moment is to bring the area into attainment, because if we're in non-attainment and bumped up to moderate, we will have to add on those additional controls, that RACM, reasonably achievable control technology, and reasonably achievable control measures, and that will include additional control for Kentucky utilities. So that is a price we'd have to take into account. The other thing to keep in mind is that inspection and maintenance vehicle emissions testing program.
I'm sorry, you're speaking softly.
I'm sorry, is that VET program. So our primary goal this summer is to bring the area into attainment. And once we reach that attainment, then we can have an opportunity to evaluate removing RFG at that time.
And that will take place, assuming that happens, in 2026, did you say?
The vehicle emission testing program would be in place by 2026 if we're bumped up to moderate. If we're redesignated to attainment, that's off the table. So for us in Louisville, the primary goal this summer is to see the area redesignated to attainment. That puts us back on a clear status quo playing ground. And at that point, removing RFG would be something we could evaluate.
Okay. It appears to me that this whole process, going back to Governor Jones, and the decision to opt in has been basically an alphabet soup. You're trying to figure out which letter goes with what situation in order to get your ultimate situation, and it seems like it's never been perfected because there's 26 letters in the alphabet and there's an infinite number of solutions. And so it seems like, and I concur with with Representative Bratcher on some of his observations, that it's rather frustrating to go through. They're trying to play a game with this, and I don't mean that in a derogatory standpoint, but in terms of trying to do this. One thing you mentioned in your presentation, and I come from more of a health perspective, and being a severe asthmatic when I was growing up, what data do you have that you can present that going through this process has reduced or improved any type of health situation when it comes to lungs, asthmatic, and so forth?
So I'll be happy to provide to Mr. Snyder a copy of US EPA's regulatory impact analysis for the 2015 ozone standard, where they do evaluate that public health standard. There are also several other publications that I can share with you.
Have y'all performed any health analysis or data in order to see if that agrees with it or if it makes sense to you?
So APCD is a regulatory agency, and our mission is to be able to bring the area into attainment with that standard. That's our charge under the Clean Air Act and under KRS Chapter 77.
Okay, I would appreciate trying to find that information, because that's the underlying issue, I think, with public health. And if we're sitting there trying to play this game and there's no movement or no benchmarks being made, then what is some type of political ploy that we're doing? Which I hope it's not the case, and I like to think things are improving in doing that. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I misspoke just a moment ago. We do have one more questioner, and that will be the last one, is Representative Huff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to read a statement from the Air Pollution Control District as reported by WLKY. It says, based off of our 2019-2021 air monitoring data, the Louisville area is now meeting the national ambient air quality standards. And if that was the case for 2019, 20, and 21, what is kind of the problem really of getting it taken care of?
Could you go back a couple slides, Michael? Mine, sorry. Let's get to where we're at. So the Clean Air Act, again, it's prescriptive, keep going a little more, prescriptive process. Couple more. We have the data that shows that we've met the standard. There are a couple of steps that aren't shown on this particular slide. We've had to certify our data for the ozone season from 2021. We completed that early in January. In Louisville, because we have the state's NCORE monitor, that's a multi-pollutant air monitoring site, we're required to monitor ozone year-round. So we have also early certified the full year's worth of ozone data. That took us a little longer because we had to wait until December 31st to get that data. There were other requirements under the Clean Air Act in order to get us to the point where we were able to prepare the request for redesignation. Both Louisville and Northern Kentucky have prepared our request for redesignation. We're out for public comment. There will be a hearing if one is requested. Once that's complete, it will go to US EPA. Once it's approved, they will designate us as attaining the standard. So we're in a good spot right now. We anticipate our public comment period ending on July 29th. If we have a public hearing, we have that scheduled for the first week of August. And shortly thereafter, it will go to our peers at US EPA. So we hope that we've worked collaboratively with them. There won't be any surprises in this submittal, and that we'll see a quick response from them.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It's been quite informative.